Hey everyone, Ilya here. I'll be reading and commenting on this piece that I just published on Hauntologies.net. It will be out by the time you listen to this, I'm sure. I was interviewed by Al Jazeera to discuss this symbol, this large Star of David that was carved out by seemingly Israeli tanks in northern Gaza, and it can be viewed from space. Like lots of folks have seen it on Google Maps and such. And so I commented on Al Jazeera, first to my friend Justin Salhani in written format, and also appeared in video format on their channel. By the time this is out, it will likely be on their channel, so I'll link it somewhere. I wanted to talk a bit more though of like why I think this is pretty significant, what I see in like how I interpret this symbol beyond just like, a bunch of soldiers being stupid and wanting to appear on Google Maps, although that's certainly part of it. So I'll be reading out parts of it here, as I said, part of the piece, and commenting on it. So, in Beit Hanun, North Gaza, Israeli soldiers carved the Star of David on what used to be agricultural land, using apparently tanks, as I mentioned. I spoke to Al Jazeera's Justin Salhani, who, by the way, is also a regular contributor to the From the Periphery project, and I said this. This is the full quote, because obviously in his piece he used parts of it, not all of it, but this is the full quote of what I sent him. We are seeing what absolute impunity looks like in an army that is given everything it needs to destroy Palestinian life. As in any genocide, those committing them often take pleasure in displaying their superiority by forcing their civilians on their victims. The Israeli army also utilizes religious figures who speak of this genocide of Palestinians and the colonization of Gaza as a religious duty. The IDF has rabbis on the ground and soldiers have brought the menorah and the shofar to the battlefield. This is not new, it's just much more widespread now. The Israeli religious philosopher Yeshayahu Leibowitz describes such attitudes as that of Judeo-Nazis, his words, in the early 1990s, warning that it could become the norm if not stopped. Sadly, he was right. So, Al Jazeera also reported that this seems to have been made by one of the battalions of the IDF, the 97th Netzach Yehuda, because what looks like the number 7979 is also carved next to it. The battalion, which by the way translates to Judah's victory in Hebrew, in case you thought the Israelis are subtle about their intentions, is all male and ultra-Orthodox. As a result, I have seen folks focus on that detail and explain it away as being the act of a small number of religious extremists. Putting aside the question of why the IDF includes religious extremists in its ranks, and spoiler alert, it's because they share the same goal as the Israeli secular mainstream, I think this misses the point, which is to celebrate. This act is an act of celebration during a genocide by the genocidaire. It's not exactly novel to see the deployment of symbolism during genocides. When the Nazis marked Jewish shops and homes with the Star of David, they were not only humiliating their victims, but also signaling to one another that the time has come. It is one thing, for example, for ISIS to destroy the heritage of those they sought to erase. It is another thing for them to film themselves doing it, for them to leave a very visible embodied declaration of "we are here to stay." Public acts of violence have a specific connotation that is not the same as those committed in the dead of night, in secret or without much thought to publicize them as widely as possible. This is why the white supremacist march in Charlottesville was so important, and why the far right in the US, emboldened by their fascist icon Donald Trump, has adopted the Black Lives Matter slogan, "Whose streets? Our streets." What the IDF did in Gaza is as far away from a secret as it gets. It can literally be seen from outer space. Even if Palestinians erase it, as I'm sure they will, the damage has been done. That battalion announced that it is here to stay. It may leave temporarily because of a ceasefire, but those soldiers know very well what the Israeli state means by ceasefire. You cease, we fire. They will try to come back. They even have Trump publicly declaring ethnic cleansing as policy. And their man Smotrich is already working on a plan to turn that into a reality. Whether they manage is highly unlikely, but in some sense that doesn't matter. I mean, obviously it matters and they must be stopped, but my point is that it doesn't necessarily matter to them. The goal is to colonize Gaza, and ethnically cleanse it of its native inhabitants. If not all, then as many as they can. That's what the entirety of the state of Israel is built on. That's why we call it the Nakba, the catastrophe, because what other words could be sufficient enough to describe the Israeli obsession with destroying as much of the land as possible, the same land it ostensibly wants for itself, for the sole purpose of making sure that the indigenous population cannot use it. What else explains the Israeli obsession with destroying olive trees, for example? Do olive trees speak Arabic? Are they Arabs? I mean, as ridiculous as it sounds, yeah, kind of, to the Israeli state, the olive trees are also Arabs. That is why they are fine with replanting newer olive trees after destroying the old ones. The older ones are a reminder of who was there before they came along. That's what the Hebraization of Palestinian place names was always about. And in between parentheses I put, yes, that is what it is literally called, that's what the Israelis called it. And I've linked to a Wikipedia article because it's quite well cited and it includes a few useful maps. If you're listening to this, the article is titled Hebraization of Palestinian Place Names. What I am saying here is that it is important to understand that punishing the land itself has always been part of the settler-colonial process. The land is wrong, ugly, it must be corrected and beautified. It cannot serve as a permanent witness to what you have done to be here. It must be maimed by the same machine that maims Palestinian children and that has created the, quote, highest number of children amputees per capita anywhere in the world, end quote, in Gaza. Here I was quoting the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. The war on the land is the same war that is committed against children. The innocence of children is part of the process of genocide. The impossibility of their guilt is what the Israelis sought to bomb away, and that is what they achieved in Gaza. It is now completely normal in mainstream Israeli discourse to talk about killing large numbers of children. Unlike with Russian genocidal discourse vis-à-vis Ukrainians, the Israelis do not believe Arabs are just Jews in denial. To quote one Israeli woman, who by the way has a very thick New York accent, there is no such thing as a Palestinian. They are just Arabs. And by the way, I've used a YouTube clip from a channel that is called the Ask Project, or ASK. The title of the video itself is called Israelis, do you know how many civilians have been killed in Gaza? So if you write that on your YouTube search engine or whatever, just again, Israelis, do you know how many civilians have been killed in Gaza? You will find a video that was released a few weeks ago that has roughly 200,000 views. That's the one I'm referring to here. Palestinian children, like the land of Palestine, are marked for annihilation. If they could just stop being Palestinians, then they could be treated like any other Arabs as far as the Israelis are concerned. To quote our New Yorker friend again, quote, the natural instinct of a Jewish woman is to protect her children. A Palestinian woman doesn't have that, end quote. This is not outrageous discourse in Israel. What is rare is that it is said in English, because these words are usually uttered in Hebrew. It is very important for her to tell herself that Palestinian mothers are not like Jewish mothers. Otherwise, she would have to wrestle with the fact that she is wishing something upon mothers that she would, rightfully so, find horrifying if done to her. She doesn't have to, however, and that's the point. She doesn't have to think about what it is her people are doing to another people. When asked whether she knew how many civilians have been killed in Gaza, she responded, who gives a shit? Because, quote, children grow up to be Arabs, end quote. I found that quite interesting, because she sort of admits there to seeing them as children first, which is why she had to add that they grow up to be Arabs. So as children, they're not yet guilty of being Arabs, but they grow up to be Arabs, so it is justified to kill them. Alright, that's all for me this time around, folks. I will say that if you want to listen to something kind of similar but much more in-depth, I do recommend checking out the episode I did with our colleague Daniel Voskobojnik called The Holocaust, the Nakba, and Reparative Memory. It is episode 172 of the Fire These Times, and in which I particularly focused, at least in the first half roughly of that conversation, on like why I found the movie The Zone of Interest to be so relatable as an Arab. As usual, if you want to continue supporting this project, patreon.com/fromtheperiphery is the way to go. If you're listening to this on hauntologies.net, that means you're listening to this on the newsletter, which means you're already a paid subscriber of that newsletter. So thanks for that. Otherwise, this goes to the public feed of the Friday's Times, and as usual, Patreon subscribers from the Periphery Media Collective get this as early access. I'll also take the opportunity to mention that our good friend Ayman Makarim just released a video on the Patreon called Where Are the Arabs? And I highly recommend checking that out. It's quite long and in depth. It's like an hour and a half long or so. And I think he outdid himself this time around. As always, thank you for listening, everyone, and take care.